Hey guys, welcome back. Week 6 again. We're going to be talking about energy flow in our ecosystems, and I want to go over a couple of things with you. This is a really short lesson, so it should be kind of like an easy time to read, an easy read and an easy listen. I know some of these videos can be rather long, trying to make it as short as possible so you guys get as much of it, as much of the information as possible. All right, so I'm going to go ahead by starting to share my screen, and then we're going to talk about, or should I put myself here? Of course. All right, so food chains. Food chains, we're going to be talking about food chains, and food chains are very simplistic visualizations of the way that energy flows from one organism to the other. So primary producers and consumers are linked through feeding relationships. So we link our primaries and our consumers through these food chains. So right there where I am in the middle, you start over here, you see the sunlight, the grass, the antelope, the lion, and the dung beetle. That is a simple food chain. And so it's a little bit different than a food web. A food chain is simplistic. It has this idea where the lion only eats antelope, or the antelope only eats that species of grass, and so it's very specific and um, not entirely accurate all the time. So energy flows through an ecosystem in a one-way stream. It can only go from a producer to a consumer. You cannot have a producer or a consumer eat the producer and then the producer eat the consumer. So the producer's always at the first trophic level. It begins with them and then it moves on to the other consumers. However, you cannot have a producer in the middle of a food chain. Doesn't make sense. All right. So energy flows through an ecosystem in a one-way stream from a primary producer to various consumers. Some chains can be very, very short. Others can be very long. Chains in the ocean tend to be a little bit longer than chains on land. So for example, we have the antelope that feeds on the grass and the lion eats the antelope. Therefore, the lion is 2 steps removed from the primary producer. So we see the grass on this side is the primary producer, and he is 2 steps away from that primary producer. That's all that means. So the primary producer is the grass in this situation. If we wanted to say the dung beetle, which is over here, he is actually 3 steps away from the primary producer. So you just count how many steps away they are, and then it gives you what trophic level they belong to. So in the ocean, the chains are longer. Primary producers are tiny floating algae called phytoplankton. We talked about phytoplankton, and what eats phytoplankton? Zooplankton, or animal-like plankton. And that zooplankton is the second step in the food chain. So you have to go through a lot of different steps in order to get to the tuna, which is the one we eat, or the mackerel is the one we eat, and so on and so forth. So bigger fish are going to be further away from the food chain. So in the one at the bottom, we have the phytoplankton, and then we have the shrimp-like creatures that are the zooplankton, and then we have the small fish, the mackerel, the tuna, the shark. So in that particular example, the mackerel is 3 steps away from the producer. The tuna is 4 steps away from the producer. So 1 zooplankton, 2 small fish, 3 mackerel, 4 tuna. So he's 4 steps away from the primary producer. Now this is important when we start talking about trophic levels and how much energy is moved from one trophic level to the other. So keep in mind that there's only for every time you go up a step, you're only moving 10% of that energy into the next step. So for example, the phytoplankton has 100% of the energy. Now the zooplankton only has 10% of that energy. and then the small fish only has 1%, and then that's 0.1 and 0.001, and so on and so forth. So it really decreases the energy by a lot every time it moves from one trophic level to the other. So that's why we count trophic levels. All right. All right, so food webs. So food webs are a little different. They will include several animals in an ecosystem. So food webs are more realistic about the way that nutrients move through an ecosystem. So many animals eat more than one kind of animal. So for example, in this picture, we have the python. Python eats the rat, it eats the frog, and the wolf apparently. Um, so there's a lot of different things that the python may eat in its lifetime. The butterfly in this situation will eat pollen off of the lavenders and will eat pollen off of the flowering plants. And, so there's going to be animals who have more than one other animal in their diet. So for example, the raccoon in the next picture and the moorhens, which is a duck, and the marsh, in the saltwater marsh, will eat many different species of plants. Panthers and alligators prey on these animals. And so when we go to the next slide, you'll see that picture. This network of feeding interactions are called food webs. So food webs are more of an interaction between all the animals and all the different animals and what they eat and what they have in their diet, rather than food chains where they're very direct and one animal eats the other and so on. The food chains are different paths that can be taken for a specific animal. Decomposers and detrivores have a vital role in the movement of energy and matter through food webs. That's why it's so important to have earthworms in an ecosystem. If you've ever lived in a brand new house or brand new community that they just built, you will be missing a lot of animals. But as you live there longer and longer, and something that I've been noticing lately is that as you live in an area longer and the ecosystem starts to come back and try to regrow some of those animals that used to be there, some of those animals now start coming into that ecosystem, it changes the ecosystem. So you get a lot more insects first. I've been seeing a lot of worms lately. There's a lot of, in my area, those curly-tailed lizards that weren't here before. There's a lot of, we've had some rats. Before all of this, before when we were brand new construction, we would have fox all the time because this was their natural habitat. So really cool to be in this situation where you see the ecosystem change over time. So most producers die without being eaten. So the detritus pathway, the decomposers will convert the dead material to detritus, which can then be eaten by the detrivores like shrimp. So without these decomposers, the nutrients in the dead organism would remain locked in that matter. So if you have a dying grass or a dying plant and there is no decomposer to decompose that, the energy that's left inside of that dying plant will be locked in that dying plant unless the detrivore decomposes it and converts it into something that another animal can eat. So it's very important that we have these decomposers and that we have the detritus and the detrivores. All right, so this is the picture I was talking about when we were talking about the moorhen and the raccoons. So you see the moorhen is being eaten by the alligator and is being eaten by the panther. So the moorhen has two different predators, while the moorhen eats the plant and leaves and seeds and fruit. The raccoon will eat the plant and leaves and seeds and food, and will also eat the crayfish So these arrows are arrows that are showing you what each of these animals eat and the flow of the energy, not necessarily the nutrients, the flow of the energy, where the energy is going and where did it come from. So if the arrow is pointing towards the panther, that means that yes, the panther ate that, but the energy from that morning is going towards the panther. Hope that makes sense. All right, so food webs. Um, Biologists will use food webs to answer questions about the ecosystem. Some of these questions can be as follows. So, how might an oil spill affect the number of bacteria and fungi that break down detritus? What effect do you think that would have on the shrimp or the crawfish? So, given this particular example in this picture, if we have an oil spill and there are bacteria that eat oil, right? That get their nutrients off of oil, whatnot. Um, how is that going to affect bacteria and fungi that break down the detritus? And then when we are not able to break down the detritus, what happens to the shrimp and the crawfish that eat the detritus? Um, and then what do you think that happen, or what do you think happens to the population um, of the crawfish? You know, are they going to decrease, increase, stay the same? If they did, how might the pig frog change their feeding behavior? So now we look at the pig frog, and the pig frog eats what? The pig frog eats the crayfish. So now, what's going to happen to the pig frog? And then in turn, what's going to happen to alligator? But the alligator doesn't only eat pig frog, they eat a lot of other things. So theoretically, the alligator would probably survive. But then there's a pig frog that only eats the crayfish. They would have to change their diet, or their numbers are going to decrease. And then how might the change in the frog behaviors affect other species? So what is benefiting from this frog? We have the alligator, we have that bird with the long beak that also benefits from the frog. So how is that going to change the relationship between all of them? All right. So I want you guys to make an analogy. So how are decomposers like a city's recycling center? So we have the decomposers that have dead material, and they're going to break it down and convert it into something else. And so this little robot is converting the Legos into another structure. And that structure is now going to be able to be biologically ready for another um, animal or another organism to use and to unlock that energy now. Okay, ecological pyramids. There are three kinds of ecological pyramids. The three are energy, biomass, and numbers. So pyramids of energy, pyramids of biomass, pyramids of numbers. Each step is called a trophic level. So first trophic level is always going to be primary producers. Primary consumers are going to be the second level. They're the first ones to consume the primary producers. But primary producers are always going to be on the first level. Cannot be on any other level, because primary producers cannot eat anything else except make their own sugars through sunlight and photosynthesis. So primary producers will always be in the first level with the most amount of energy available. Ecological pyramids are models that show the relative amount of energy or matter contained within each trophic level in a food chain or food web. All right, pyramids of energy. I'm sorry, pyramids of talking about these different types of pyramids. And the first one we're going to be talking about is energy. And the pyramid of energy shows the relative amount of energy available at each trophic level of a food chain or food web. So in these type of pyramids, we are looking at the energy flow. How much energy is moving from one level to the following level. So primary producers, you see they have 100% primary, they have 100% of the energy. Because they make their energy, they have 100% available. But what goes to the next level is only 10%. So the energy that's available in the first level consumers is only going to be 10%. Then the following level, we have 1, and the next level, we have 0.1, and the level on top of that would be 0.01. So you can have an unlimited amount of levels, but you can see that with each level increase, with each new level or new trophic level on top of that, you're going to get less and less and less and less energy at the top of that pyramid. So the next level is going to be 0.01. The level on top of that is 0.001, and so on and so forth. So is it efficient? No. Can you have it? Yes. Probably will not exist because it is not efficient way of introducing the energy that you need for life processes. So probably not going to happen. So in theory, there's a limit. There is no limit to how many trophic levels there are in a food web or how many organisms there are in each level, but the energy that is stored in each trophic level is very small for the next consumer. So higher the pyramid, the less available energy there is. The reason why is because the animal will use most of the energy that it does consume. So the primary producers do not use the energy, but the next level uses 90% of the energy, and 10% is left for the next level. So they use 90% of the energy just for life processes like respiration, movement, growth, and reproduction. So by the time they're done using that energy, it goes to the next one, there's only 10% to offer. So I mean, there's no limit to how many animals we can have or organisms we can have in one level. However, it could create a problem for biomass. On average, 10% of the energy available at one trophic level is transferred to the next. It will continue to decrease to 10% each time. All right, so this is a pyramid of biomass. So a pyramid of biomass is a model that illustrates the relative amount of living organic matter in each trophic level of an ecosystem. So the total amount of living tissue within a trophic level is called a biomass. The biomass is measured in grams per unit area. So here is a model of what that pyramid would look like. So 9 kilocalories per square meter per year. This is very specific. The one in your book is not as specific. And your one in the book also tends to put biomass and numbers together because they are very related to each other. All right, so that's what the pyramid looks like. All right, pyramid of numbers. So pyramid of numbers is a pyramid or a model that shows the relative number of individual organisms at each trophic level in an ecosystem. So the number of individual decreases from the level below it. So in some instances, the pyramid of numbers could be turned upside down. However, biomass will always be right side up. So for example, we have numbers. So how many organisms live in a specific ecosystem and are feeding off of one animal. So for example, at the top, we have the right side up. The biomass will tend to be right side up, while the numbers could be inverted. And the reason why is because if we have a lot of insects in one tree, then the numbers of insects are much higher than that one tree. But biomass is talking about the matter or the mass that is inside of that tree. So the biomass, the tree, weighs more or has more matter or has more living tissue than the insects do altogether. So biomass is still going to be right side up, while the other situation with all the insects inside the tree is not going to be, it's going to be inverted. So that's why we have this inverted representation of numbers, while this would be kind of what biomass would look like, or a regular representation of numbers could look like as well. All right, so we're at the end of our PowerPoint. We did the whole lesson. I just want to go over what I want from you guys as far as your assignment. So invasive species assignment, this is going to be the project grade for this week. And what I want you to do is create a food web of your species. Remember, you chose a species, an invasive species. You chose it week 2, I believe it was. And we talked about, you know, certain aspects about this invasive species. Where do they live? Where did they once originate from? What was their backstory? Whatnot. So we're going to build on that. And what I want you to do is that with that species that you chose, create a food web. This should include as many animals as possible for that particular ecosystem. So the python lives in the Everglades. If you pick the python, you're going to create a food web for the python in the Everglades. So I want you guys to do it in the ecosystem that they are invading. So the one that you guys chose, where they're an invasive species. I want to see what that food web looks like. Okay, so at minimum, you should have 10 animals in that ecosystem, where that animal currently lives and is an invasive species. And then after you have created your food web, all I want you to do is answer this one other question. So after you've created your food web, in the ecosystem to which they are invasive, research how it would be different if they were in their original habitat. So what does the food web here or wherever that species is invasive? So for example, the python is invasive to here, to south, to Florida, to the Everglades. How would it be different, or how would the python's food web be different in the original environment in which they came from? Okay, so that's all I want you guys to answer. I don't know if it's a simple question to look up, or if you're gonna have to look up a food web in which they are a part of in another area or whatnot, and see how that differs. So basically the question you're answering is how this food web, the one you created, is different from the one they would be a part of in their original ecosystem. All right, please be creative. Pictures with each of these animals, create your food web like the ones I've provided to you. And this will be extended. Instead of being due this Saturday, will be due the following Saturday, so that you have enough time to come up with these pictures, label them, draw your arrows, and whatnot. A way to maybe do this, the easier way to do this would probably be printing out all of your pictures in a Word document in the way that you kind of want them to be, and then drawing out your arrows in which way they're going to be feeding, and then just taking a picture of your food web and then uploading that picture into Canvas. So you have both ways, or you have that way of doing it. Be as creative as possible. If you want to use PowerPoint because it's easier to create the arrows and whatnot, do that as well. So whatever you guys like. If you have any questions regarding this project, or you need help with any of this, please come to my Zoom hours. I'm always available from 11 to 12:30, and every day, Monday through Friday, 11 to 12:30. And I will walk you through it, and we'll talk about ideas that you may have for your food web or whatnot. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm also available by email, so if you don't want to use Zoom, that's fine. Email is good too. I'm really good at answering the email right away. All right, guys. Love you. See you guys later. And I hope you enjoyed this awesome video I made for you. Bye, guys.